Good evening, everyone. We are in Second Kings chapter 23, and we ended yesterday in verse 19. I'd like to bring us back just a few verses before, back to verse 15, when we were talking about the altar and the high place, which is the Bama, private altar, which Jeroboam, the son of Nevat, and he was the king who started the northern kingdom after the death of King Solomon. The kingdom was split into two, the northern and the southern. And the southern was ruled by the son of Solomon, Rehoboam, and the north was ruled by Jeroboam, the son of Nevat, with the 10 tribes. Now, he misled Israel into sin by building two altars, one in Bethel and one in Dan, with the sole interest where he didn't want his people going down south. Uh, and down south would be in Jerusalem. And they were worried that if they went down south, these people may not come back. And hence, he instead made two altars with two golden calves and told the people they could worship there and don't need to go down to Jerusalem to do any of the feasts. And so here it says he had made that altar, the high place, and Josiah tore them down, burned the high place to and ground them to dust and burned the Asherah. Now, what we are seeing is for the first time, Josiah actually reversed everything that the northern kingdom had done. Not only what Ammon had done or Manasseh had done, but he went further up to Samaria to do just that. Now, one interesting thing that I didn't manage to do yesterday was to take you through the next few verses, which will lead on to where we are today. Josiah saw the graves there on the mountain, and he took the bones from the graves. Now, what is important here is the exhumation. Exhumation is, in a way, you find that it desecrates the grave. But these were the graves of the priests of Jeroboam for these two altars. And so he took the bones and burned them on the altar to defile the altar so that they become unclean. Now, what is important here is this: the gravestone that he sees and he is reminded is the grave of the man of God who came from Judah, who warned Jeroboam of these things. And he was the one who prophesied against the altar of Bethel. I want to draw your attention now to the right hand side, and you will find this. This is the man of God who came from Judah to Bethel by the word of God, and meaning God instilled upon this man of God by tradition. His name was Iddo. Uh, while Jeroboam was standing at the altar to burn incense, and he cried out against the altar by the word of God. It says, "Altar, altar, this is what the Lord says. Behold, a son shall be born from the house of David, Josiah by name, and he shall sacrifice the priests of the high places who burn incense on you. Human bones shall burn on you." And immediately you can see that this is what happened right here. The bones of the priests were sacrificed and burned on the altar to desecrate the altar. So the desecration of the graves, taking out the bones, burning it. Now, All of this is very important for us to understand. And the grave of this particular man of God was not desecrated. And so in verse 18 of 2 Kings 23, Josiah said, "Leave him alone. No one is to disturb his bones." And they left his bones undisturbed with the bones of the prophet who came from Samaria. And so we find that at the end of 1 Kings chapter 13, the man of God from Judah died, and he laid his body into the grave of this prophet of Samaria, and they mourned him. And in verse 31, I draw your attention. After he had buried him, he talked to his sons, and he said this: "When I die, bury me in the grave in which the man of God is buried, his own grave, and lay my bones beside his bones." And what is the significance of this here? That because his bones lay beside the bones of this man of God who came from Judah, he was not desecrated and neither was he exhumed. And that in itself is a fulfillment. Josiah did everything without even realizing it. We come to verse 20 and says, "When he slaughtered all the priests of the high places who were there on the altars." And this word slaughtered isn't the fact that he killed them. It is very much all the bones that were exhumed was put onto the altar and burned. And so human bones were burnt on them. And then he returned to Jerusalem. All of these were the fulfillment of 1 Kings chapter 13, particularly in verse 2, of which Josiah was named by name. We continue in verse 21. It says here, "And then the king commanded all the people, saying this: Celebrate the Passover to the Lord your God, as it is written in the book of the covenant," which is in the book of the Torah. Now we need to understand that the book of the covenant, which is the Torah, we actually have a copy of it written by Moses as he listened to God, and he wrote it into a scroll. And that scroll is likely the one that was recovered by Hilkiah somewhere stashed in the temple itself. Now, what is important is about this Passover, the Pesach, and it was made as a comment that truly such a Passover had not been celebrated since the days of the judges who judged Israel, nor in the days of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah. And in the 18th year of King Josiah, this Passover was celebrated to the Lord in Jerusalem. And herein, we need to understand a little bit. We have this particular text that we can refer to Second Chronicles, and in chapter 35 and in verse 18, it was since the days of Samuel, Shemuel, which is really, he was the last of the judges and the first of the prophets. What is important now to us is to be very mindful that all these period of time from Samuel to this period of time, what does it mean that such a Passover had not been celebrated? In a time of Saul, David, and Solomon, they have been celebrating the Passover. But this period is particularly interesting because of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah, particularly since the days of judges who judged Israel. When we had the northern kingdom and then the southern kingdom, remember the northern kingdom did not come to Jerusalem because there were the two altars that was made by Jeroboam. And in the south, we have the temple, which is where God says 3 times a year, you must come down. And so the Passover was not celebrated when there was a split kingdom in the days of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah. After King Hoshea, where the northern kingdom was demolished, many of the people in the northern kingdom came to the south and thereby would come at a time of Hezekiah and then Manasseh. Manasseh had actually been a bad king, had defiled the land with idolatry, and then he changed and repented in his last period. And then his son Ammon went far out and became even worse. With Josiah, Josiah has realized since that all these practices of idolatry has to be removed. And once that was done, he celebrated the Passover at this time according to the Torah as he has read, as written by Moses. And the reason why such a Passover has not been celebrated was that the northern kingdom never did that in Jerusalem. And now, with the northern kingdom gone, and the people from the northern kingdom had come down to the south, in the 18th year, they celebrated the Passover together again. And that would be the understanding how the Passover is celebrated. It's not that it was never celebrated, it's just that it wasn't celebrated with the intensity and the celebration with the northern tribes. Verse 24. Now, we have always been said that there are many things in life, especially supernatural practices, that will distract the people from God. And here Josiah did the right thing. He actually removed the necromancers. These are the mediums that will deal with the dead using the bones and the idols. The idols and all the abominations that were seen in the land of Judah and in Jerusalem. If you remember, I had indicated to you in the book of Ezekiel, in chapter 8, you find that in the temple itself, they had all kinds of practices that was against God with idols of all sorts. And so what Josiah did was to remove all the distractions from the land so that he might fulfill the words of the Torah, which were written in the book that Hilkiah the priest found in the house of God. As I had indicated, likely to be the book that Moses himself had written. Before him, there was no king like him who turned to the Lord with all his heart, all his soul, and all his mind. Remember, this is about Deuteronomy chapter 6 and in verse 5. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might, with everything at his disposal. The Shema, basically, in compliance to all the Torah that God gave Moses, and none after him did the same. And so what we're trying to say is that in this part of 2 Kings chapter 23, when there were the split kingdom, starting from Jeroboam in the north, and then Rehoboam in the south. None of these kings had really focused on the Torah that was given by Moses. In turn, it was really originally given by God. And now Josiah saw exactly what needed to be done, and he cleaned the house. So this is about cleaning the entire land, the entire practices, and all the people together to cut a covenant with God to follow after the Torah of God. We now read verse 26. In verse 26 says this, nevertheless, the Lord did not turn from the fierceness of his great wrath with which his anger burned against Judah. Why? Because whatever Manasseh did, because all the provocations with which Manasseh had provoked him, one of the things we find is that Josiah had cleaned Samaria, he had cleaned Jerusalem. These are two of the centers of idolatry. But what had happened is that the provocations with which Manasseh had done, what Manasseh had done is that he had influenced society. It is not just the mere places of burning incense and sacrifices. Manasseh had done what no other kings had done because he had reshaped the minds of the people. And because there was the minds of the people that was reshaped, God really wanted to destroy Jerusalem. The people of Judah, not all of them were bad, but it was not possible at this time to revert back to the glory days of David and Solomon. The society at large had turned bad. Although Josiah did what was right, removed all the Bama, he removed all the illegal uh, altars that Jeroboam had done, but the people had been so ingrained that secretly they were practicing idolatry. We read in verse 27, the Lord said, I will also remove, and this word remove is cause Judah to turn aside from my eyes. Now, this is the actual Hebrew text. It's like God looking at Judah, and this word here, cause to turn, means take Judah and move it out of sight. Now, this is the very imagery that we are told right now. And what does this mean? And God explains, just as I removed Israel from his sight. And so what we have seen now is that Israel is already gone. Israel is out of sight. The northern kingdom, by the way, not Israel as a whole, but the northern kingdom is out of sight. God is no longer looking at her. And so it says here, and I will reject this city which I've chosen, Jerusalem, and the temple which I said my name shall be there. They are supposed to go there 3 times a year. God appointed Jerusalem as a place where his name will be established, meaning the temple. Verse 27 clearly is a prophecy. The prophecy is with regards to the evil that God is seeing. just like he saw the evil in the days of Noah, and that he will remove all the people by destroying them from the face of the earth by the great flood. God says that I will also remove you out of my sight. Now, in this particular case, we have the northern kingdom being dispersed across the lands. But for Judah, God will also want to remove her away from God's land, which is the land they are occupying now. And we know that they will be removed to Babylon, because eventually Babylon will become stronger than the Assyrians. Verse 28, the rest of the acts of Josiah, what he did, they are written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah, which we don't have. What we have in the book of Chronicles is written during the times of Ezra. Verse 29. Verse 29 says, in his days, it will be at a time in the end days of Josiah. The event that happened was Pharaoh Necho. Now, Pharaoh is a name or a title given to the king of Egypt, and the king's name is Necho. The king of Egypt, he went up to the king of Assyria at the river Euphrates. Now, this is a very interesting event. This event is called the Battle of Carchemish. Battle of Carchemish. And this was a battle between Egypt and Assyria. And in this war was quite an interesting war. We have Necho here fighting against Assyria. But along the way from Egypt, he has to pass by the land of Israel. And then he will go further up north to the river Euphrates. What happened was Josiah saw the king of Egypt passing through. Now, it's important for us to understand Israel is a very strategic place. Why is Israel strategic? Is because for anyone to go from Africa to Asia or to Europe, they must pass by Israel. And so Israel is seen as a revolving door. And interestingly, you know the word Galilee, Galil. Galil means a revolving door. So from Africa to Asia and Europe, they must pass through Israel. And in this case, Pharaoh Necho came by. In verse 29, it says, and then King Josiah went to meet him. Now, this word meet him is to encounter him. The word encounter is to attack. We actually can see this particular event in the book of Second Kings. It is interesting for us to see that in Second Chronicles in chapter 35 records a little bit more information. Josiah was not supposed to engage with Pharaoh Necho. And Pharaoh Necho is one of the world powers. So is the king of Assyria. Israel, not so much. But Josiah felt that he had to go and engage with Pharaoh Necho, and Pharaoh Necho didn't want to fight with him. But unfortunately, Josiah didn't listen and fought with Pharaoh Necho, and Pharaoh Necho killed him at Megiddo. And the way that he died was from a stray arrow, and Josiah died an untimely death. Verse 30, his servants carried Josiah's body in a chariot from Megiddo. Now, Megiddo is a very, very popular plain in the north, near Galilee. And they must cross through that area. And Megiddo is a plain, flat, and is great for warfare. And many wars are fought there. And Josiah died, brought him to Jerusalem, and then buried him in his own tomb. And then the people of the land took Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, and then anointed him and then made him king in place of his father. And so after Josiah, we have Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah. Now, at this point in time, we find that Jehoiakim was 23 years old when he became king, which means that um, Josiah probably had him when he was in his teens, 15, 16 years. But he only reigned for 3 months in Jerusalem, and this is important. 3 months is an unusually short time. His mother's name was Hamutal. Hamutal, the daughter of Yirmiyahu of Livnah. In verse 32, Jehoiakim was said when he became king, and then he did evil in the eyes of God, in accordance with all that his forefathers had done. That would be Ammon, Manasseh, and of course the other kings before. Verse 33. And then Pharaoh Necho imprisoned him at Rivlah in the land of Hamath. Now, this idea, the land of Hamath, somewhere in Syria that we know of, so that he would not reign in Jerusalem. And he imposed the land a fine of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. Now, this word fine, uh, as a penalty to the people, Pharaoh Necho did not like Jehoiakim and replaced him instead. And so we read now in verse 34, and then Pharaoh Necho, he made Eliakim, the son of Josiah, king in the place of his father Josiah. This is Eliakim. Now we know of this Eliakim because he has another name. His other name is mentioned right here. He changed his name to Jehoiakim, but he took Jehoiakim, Pharaoh Necho, and brought him to Egypt, and he died there. So we find that after the imprisonment at Rivlah, which is in Syria, then he was taken to Egypt and imprisoned there as well. The next would be Jehoiakim. That is his new name. And he too is a son of Josiah. We read in verse 35, it says, Jehoiakim gave the silver and gold to Pharaoh. Now, what happened is this: because Eliakim or Jehoiakim was installed by Egypt, it tells us now at this time Judah is a vassal state of Egypt. So we are now told Jehoiakim assessed the land in order to give the money at the command of Pharaoh. This word assess in verse 35 literally means to arrange or cause to set aside. Now, this is a particular word, cause to set aside, which means Eliakim or Jehoiakim did not take from the treasury, or the treasury is already bankrupt. He had to go and collect from everywhere else so that he has enough to give to Pharaoh when the Pharaoh asked for it, which tells us that Judah is getting poorer and poorer by the year. He collected the silver and gold from the people of the land, each according to his assessment. And the idea of assessment here is an arrangement to tell them how much to pay so that Jehoiakim can give to Pharaoh Necho. This is what we call a vassal state, where every year you've got to pay tribute, a gift to Pharaoh Necho. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 11 years in Jerusalem, much better than Jehoahaz, the brother, who only ruled for 3 months. And this was the son of a different mother. The mother's name is Zavuda, and she is a daughter of Pedaiah of the place called Rumah. However, as we end in verse 37, we have another word that's not translated, which is and then. We are now told, after all this background, after his installation as king, and he reigned for 11 years. And what did he do in that 11 years? He did evil in the eyes of God, in accordance with all that his forefathers had done. What we are now told is Eliakim is no better than Jehoahaz. In the 3 months Jehoahaz had ruled, he did exactly all the evil things. And now, after settling with the Pharaoh Necho, his throne is secure by paying to Pharaoh Necho. The work that he did was equally bad. Now, I want to point out to you is this. We have the few kings after Josiah. Josiah is an excellent, good king, but he was the last of all the good kings. From here on, we find that the sons of Josiah, as well as the grandsons of Josiah, which we will read in the coming 2 chapters, all the final 4 generations were bad. We are now looking at an anticlimax of the kingdom of Judah. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.